How are you guys? Welcome back to Wargaming China, a channel where I platform my understandings of the War of Resistance between China and Japan from 1931 to 1945. And as you know, I do this mainly for wargamers, modelers, and anybody who likes a bit of obscure military history. Now, today's subject is going to get a bit complicated, so you'll have to bear with me. I'm not the best communicator. Might be a long one, so turn off now or get yourself a drink, because the subject today is German 88mm guns in Chinese service. Now, this is a subject that, as I said, you'll find it contradictory, and I just find it that it's very easy to misunderstood 88mm guns in China. Now, the first thing we've got to remember is that no 88mm guns served with the Army or the Air Force. German 88mm guns are only to be found in naval service meant by naval gunners. Now, it doesn't mean they were on ships. They were also used as coastal defense artillery. Now then, what we're looking at here is the German 8.8cm flak 18/36, and it was designed in 1928 as an anti-aircraft gun for ground forces. Now, having been designed in 1928, it entered service in 1933. Its shell weight was 9 kilos. It was about 9.5 kilos. It had a muzzle velocity of 820 meters a second. Had an anti-aircraft ceiling range of about 8,000 meters. Had an artillery range of 14,860 meters. They built nearly 210,000 of them, and it was still in service through the Cold War. Now, why am I telling you all of that? I'm telling you all of that because it doesn't matter, because this gun never served with China. The flak 88/36 never served in China. And you will find plenty of examples that will tell you that it did. But it did not. It's even mentioned in videos. But it did not enter service in China. Now, what did enter service in China is 8.8cm SKC 30. Now, maybe I'll move that back. Now then. There we go. Now, according to books, China, according to English books written in the English language, China bought 20 8.8cm SKC 30 guns. Now, for the first batch in 33, the next batch, first batch of 10 in 33, the next batch of 10 had been ordered by 36. Now, if we look also at Western sources, they will tell us that they were distributed at 4 guns per battery, and there were 2 batteries equaling 8 guns at Jiangning, 2 batteries at Jiangyin, 2 batteries equaling 8 guns at Jiangning, so 8 guns at Jiangyin, 8 guns at Jiangning, and 4 guns at Beihushan. Now, at first, I had thought that there were no 88mm guns at Jiangyin, but I've been thinking on it for the last couple of weeks. Now, I looked back at the reports of guns firing on January the 8th from Jiangyin, and then I looked again at the rogue Chinese commanders who would move their guns around as a local commander, ignoring higher orders. And I've come to the conclusion, or I've come to have the conjecture or belief that perhaps the 88mm guns were firing from around the base at Jiangyin, but they weren't inside the base. And that would explain why, if the base fell on December 3rd, according to the Japanese Navy, and all the guns had been seized by then, the Japanese army was saying it was being bombarded by guns from Jiangyin. Now, Jiangyin was a fortress, but only in terms of an area. It didn't have a wall all the way around it. So the guns may not have actually been in the geographical area of the base, but may have been in its vicinity. And it is indeed these guns that may have been firing, 88mm guns, that may have been firing on the Japanese on December 8th from a locality close to Jiangyin. Now then, let's get back to the SKC-30. Okay, the SKC-30, design work on it started in 1931 for the German Navy. And right from the beginning, the German Navy wanted a dual-purpose naval gun and anti-aircraft mount. And by 1933, it was in service with the Kriegsmarine on its smaller vessels. Now the SKC-30 wasn't produced in very large numbers, and many authors dismiss it as nowhere near as effective as its cousin, the Flak 36. But if you look at the stats, the shell weight, the velocity, and the ceiling, both weapons are very similar to each other in performance. Like the SKC 88mm Navy guns have just a slightly, the muzzle velocity of an 88 Flak 18 is 820 meters a second. These guns bang them out at 790 meters a second, and the shell weight's about the same. Now, as I said, according to Western resources, 20 of these served in China. But now we're going to have a look at perhaps what Western sources didn't look at. Because there's plenty of different ways to skin a cat, isn't there? So what I first of all did was I turned to as many references as I could find to the armaments of the Chinese Navy, which, you know, is a bit of a pet subject of mine anyway. And if you look at the Chinese Navy, there are 3 88mm guns in service. Yeah, 3. Now, it appears that the first time an 88mm gun appears in Chinese service is 1912. And in 1912, the Republic of China Navy buys 2 gunboats from the German, and both gunboats are armed with 88mm guns. Then in 1915, the Chinese build locally a class of gunboat known as a Chen Kung class, and they built 3 ships, and each of these is armed, and part of the armament of each of these is an 88mm gun. So that's 5 already that I found of 88mm guns. And the reason that I started looking for them is because in Chinese forums and chat places, they're always talking about China ordering ammunition for other guns. And this has led to, maybe through mistranslation or being over keen, to some people still believing that China had the Flak 36. However, we've got to look at the how easy it is to misunderstand what the Chinese are equipping themselves with. So I've talked about 5 guns, 5 88mm guns on 5 different vessels of the RoCN. Now, 2 of those vessels had been withdrawn from service and scrapped by 1931. And the Chinese Navy, every time it scrapped anything, any ship, would always put the armaments into a fortress or a coastal defense position along her rivers, because those were coastal forces, and garrison fortress is along the coast, were manned by the Chinese Navy. So when the Chinese Navy scrapped the Chongxi and Chiangkun, they would have moved the 88mm guns to a fortress. Now then, that's all very well, isn't it? And to be honest, the 88mm gun that I've narrowed it down to that these ships were armed with was the 8.8cm SKL 30. Now, that was a gun that was in service with the German Kriegsmarine prior to World War I, and it was the armament of most U-boats. And the German army had ceased making it by the end of World War I. German Navy, had ceased making it by the end of World War I. However, and this is where the story gets interesting, you see, as well as Chinese sources saying that China was buying different ammunition than the standard ammunition for the SKC-30. There are other sources in China that say some of the guns that were received were the 8.8cm SLK-45. Now, the SLK-45, 88mm SLK-45, entered German Navy service in about 1905, and it exited German Navy service in about 1934, and it was replaced by the SKC-30. However, the SKL-45 could be upgraded to allow it to fire the same ammunition as the SKC-30 and therefore get the same performance, or a very similar performance. Now, most Westerners that entered our arguments, or the argument seems to be that that's just a fallacy, because the SKL's 45s were just not in Chinese service. Now, being somebody who, as I said, is interested in the Chinese Navy, I started to look at the Ninghai class light cruisers. Now, there was 2. There was the Ninghai and a sister ship, the Pinghai. Now, the Ninghai was launched in 1933 and carried 376mm anti-aircraft guns. But the Pinghai, both ships were built and fitted out in Japan. But the Pinghai was in docks a lot longer than that, because there were labour disputes and political manoeuvring there had to be, because the political situation and military situation Japan and China was worsening all the time. So eventually the Chinese got the Germans to intercede in the production of the Pinghai. And this was a very good thing for the Pinghai, because she received 3 8.8cm SLK-45 guns with a fire control system. And the guns are identifiable, very easy. There's lots of models and paintings and technical drawings of the Pinghai online. Now, if you look at the technical drawings, you can see that it's an 88mm gun. Now, a lot of the time, if you, especially on Google or Wikipedia, Google it quickly, you'll see that the Pinghai was armed with 76mm guns. She wasn't. They were 88mm. Photographic analysis confirms that. So, therefore, we've got perhaps as many as 23 88mm guns capable of firing the SKC 88mm ammunition, but we also have other 88mm guns, the SKL 30, that have been transferred to fortresses. Now, let's go back to the Pinghai. The Pinghai was one of the ships that met her fate defending Jiangyin and went down to Japanese air attack on the 23rd of September. Now, she didn't sink. She went down at a 40 to 45 degree angle and settled stern up. She was the right way up. She was at a 45 degree angle, and that was on the 23rd of September. Now we've got to look at the scuttling operations and look at how very good and the salvage operations of the Chinese Navy and how very good they are at salvaging things. Now the Pinghai went down on the 23rd of September. That still gives over 2 months for the Chinese Navy to strip them guns. And when we look at the salvage reports of the Pinghai was salvaged, and I think it was 1959. No, so I'm going to delete that. She was. I've read a lot. I'm getting confused. Okay, if we look at the salvage documents, we can't see any mention of 88mm guns. So there's another 3 guns that could be at a fortress. Now let's get back to where these fortresses were, where the paperwork says the fortresses were: Jiangyin, Jiangning, and Beiwushan. Now, Chinese accounts talk about 88mm guns at many fortresses. So until one has, and you know, I'm doing this one battle at a time, until I have seen so knowing how many different calibers, how many different types of 88mm guns are in Chinese naval service, and knowing how the writing and contributions of, you know, amateur historians and major historians and published authors have kind of led a dilution of the idea that the 88mm, that these SKCs were everywhere, because they keep arguing. You never see so much argument in written form about where these guns actually were. And as I said, because the Chinese local commanders have got a habit of moving their guns, and then because there's other guns, this is 88mm, we will never really know for sure, or I don't believe I'll ever know for sure, where many of these guns were, except for the ones here at Jiangning, outside of Nanjing. Now, let's talk about the SKC a little bit more. Now, the SKC was a dual purpose weapon. Now, if we look at my SKC 30, you will notice straight away that I just made the turret housing and then slipped an 88mm gun, an Airfix 88mm gun, into the housing. Okay, I mean, that's cheating, but I will tell you the differences right now between an SKC 30 and the 88mm gun. You know, as a visual comparison, just quickly. Alright then. On the 88mm gun, there's a large recoil chamber, one large recoil chamber at the rear of the gun, above the barrel. On the SKC 30, there are 3 recoil chambers. They're not as long as this, they're about half the length of the one on the 88, and there's 3 of them side by side. Okay? The SKC 30 doesn't have the defibrillators on the front of the gun. And finally, the SKC-30, as sold as a unit, comes as a turret. And you see where I've here, there should be two separate pieces. That should be a travel gun all the way across, you know. But I left it there like that for modelling purposes, to make it simple for myself. So the SKC guns that were in Chinese service weighed 5,700 odd kilos with the mount and the turret, and inside of the turret was a fuse setting machine. And when China bought her SKC guns, apparently she would buy German searchlights and sound detectors and range finders, which is why I built a little fire control. Oh, I built this really for Jiangyin, but then I realized that there was no centralized fire control system there. So at Jiangning, the guns themselves were, there was two batteries at the fortress of Jiangning. Now Jiangning is a geographical area rather than fortresses like one wall around another. The Jiangning fortress would consist of, and you're going to love these names, Black Dragon Hill, Mufo Hill. That's where, and they're part of the Fukuo line. Now that guards the approach to Nanjing along the shoulder of the Yangtze. Now, the guns themselves were in singular circle pits. And the reason I have them in these airfix like gun emplacements that I build are that on the table space I will use these as a representation of each individual fortress, because there's a group of about 5 spurs, rocky spurs, hilly, 300 odd meters high, and each one of them has defensive positions. And I haven't been able to get as many, I haven't seen any photos of them. I've just studied topographical maps. And what I'll be doing is I'll be putting one of these on Black Dragon Hill and one at Mufo, right next to the Yangtze. Now, they were dual purpose as anti-aircraft guns and a naval a naval weapon, and they were ready to face the Japanese Navy. But the Japanese Navy was still suffering, and by the time they were still struggling to get upriver from all the scuttled ships and the mines. So when the assault on Jiangning began, the Navy was not giving support. It was not a combined operation. So these guns fell into Army hands. Now the Japanese Army liked these guns a lot, and they put them into service as the Type 99 88mm anti-aircraft gun. And they built over 1,000 of them from 1938 onwards. And you can get it. You can get models of that, but with the Australian dollar being so low for so long, I just made my own. You can even get printed from Shapeways the original SKC-30 turrets. But as I said, for us with the Australian peso, it's a bit it was a bit too expensive for me. I'll only use these in 2 games. Now, as I said, I did the gun emplacements themselves are representational. But if you are building an SKC, it should be going in a circular gun pit. And again, the gun pits look brick lined and line washed. I'm just going to have a think about anything else that I might need to have mentioned. Okay. Now, part of the reason I believe that the SKC L45s may have been misunderstood as to what their existence is because many of them were upgraded. Many of the L45s were upgraded mounted on a wheeled carriage that could drop down to form a cruciform, and sold to Spain, or sent to the Spanish. And it appears that among these guns, SKC 45s and L45s, an upgraded L45 served side by side, and were given the same types and classification because they fired the same ammo. So the same thing could have happened in China. The Chinese may well have received even more SLK 45s as upgrades, because the guns had very much the same performance. I mean, as far as muzzle velocity goes, I think the SLK 45, it's 10 meters a second slower. But it's firing the shot, saying no. So this is another reason why we have to, wonder, were they all SKC guns, SKC 30 guns that China got, or were some of them the old SLK 30s, SLK 45s? So most of these guns, the records say, were stationed along the Yangtze River, and as I said, Chinese authors and chat groups have seemed to have had ongoing arguments as to where these guns served for a very long time. And I'm not going to say either. I mean, I couldn't find the ones at Jiangyin. Then, as I said, Chinese commanders moved their guns around on the sly. What were the guns originally? So there you go. I mean, that's the best I can do, and I hope you do give me a like for that, because it was a lot of research, a lot of studying, not research. I didn't go out and measure anything, but a lot of studying and reading up. Now, I want to, the coming weeks, I'm going to be we'll be setting up the attack on Jiangning, and hope you'll join me for that. Hope you enjoyed that. Cheers.